Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Genesis chapter 45. Oh my gosh, 45 chapters of Genesis. We're almost done. That's crazy. Now, if you remember last time, we ended on this big cliffhanger. We've been talking about the story of Joseph. He was sold into slavery, but God used all of his suffering, his innocent suffering, and put him in charge of all of Egypt, second in command only to Pharaoh. And now his brothers are coming to him, bowing to him, just like God said that they would, and are asking for food, for life that only Joseph can give them. And through all of Joseph's tests to see if they've really changed, we saw that Judah interceded for Benjamin. It appears that the brothers actually genuinely have changed. They genuinely regret what they did to Joseph. They've changed their ways and they're living honestly now. And they've passed every test Joseph throws at them. But now we get to the end of the matter. Will Joseph have the heart to forgive them? Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. And he cried, "Have everyone go out from me." So there was no man with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard of it. Joseph was so moved by Judah's intercession for his brother that he can't keep it together anymore, and he breaks down crying and sends out all of the Egyptians. And he's crying so loud that the Egyptians can still hear him in the next room. And his brothers have to be thinking, what's going to happen next? Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. And finally, we get the moment we've all been waiting for. Joseph is reunited with his brothers, and the brothers are in shock. They don't know what to do. They're seeing a ghost right now. Not to mention this man who they've been so afraid of, who has had absolute power over whether they live or whether they die. They realize that's our brother who we wanted to kill, who we sold into slavery. And they can only naturally be wondering, is this all some kind of sick joke? Is he planning to kill us all right here, right now? Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they came closer. And he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be grieved or be angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in this land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth, and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Now, therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all of his household, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay.'" So Joseph insists that he is not vengeful at all. He doesn't want revenge. Instead, he's amazed that God has worked this all together so that he's able to save his brothers. Through Joseph, God was able to preserve life for Joseph's family and for all the families of the earth. He gives all the credit to God and says, "Hey guys, can you go back and get my dad? I want to see him so badly. You shall live in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children and your flocks and your herds and all that you have. There I will also provide for you, for there are still 5 years of famine to come, and you and your household and all that you have would be impoverished. Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin see, that it is my mouth which is speaking to you. Now you must tell my father of all the splendor in Egypt and all that you've seen. You must hurry and bring my father down here." So Joseph tells his brothers to move their whole family down to Egypt, to this land called Goshen. He knows that there's more years of famine coming. It's not even halfway done. And there's food in Egypt by God's divine intervention through what Joseph has done. Now this should raise some eyebrows though, because we remember God has promised Canaan as an inheritance to Abraham and all of Abraham's descendants. When Abraham fled to Egypt during a famine, it was a bad thing, and sin was the result of it, and God had to bring him back to the land that he would give him. Abraham's story was all about doing everything he could to preserve that land for his descendants. And Jacob's story was about being exiled away from it and having to make his way back. Isn't this a bad thing for all of Jacob's family to move down to Goshen? Now, eventually it will become a bad thing. But as for right now, we actually get a picture of what Eden is supposed to look like. The key is in the word Goshen. According to Dr. Tim Mackey, an Old Testament scholar, he says that the word Goshen sounds a lot like the Hebrew word for garden. We also remember that back in chapter 13, when Lot was making his decision on where to go, based on the look of the land, he saw that down towards Egypt was like the garden of the Lord, was like Eden. So the image here at the end of Genesis should not be the Israelites running away from the place God has called them to. It should be God welcoming them back into Eden. Of course, it's an image, right? It's not the real new creation. And we'll see that Egypt gets really corrupt really quickly when it gets to the time of Moses and the Exodus and all of that. But here, in Joseph's generation, it's a symbolic foreshadowing of God's restoration to come. Now in verses 14 and 15, the brothers welcome Joseph back with open arms. And Joseph finally allows himself to break free and to hug and kiss his brothers and Benjamin. And just imagine how much they would have to catch up on. I mean, this is truly a huge moment of reconciliation for all the brothers. In verses 16 through 20, Joseph clears his plan for his family to move down here with Pharaoh. He says they're going to live in Goshen, and Pharaoh gives the okay on it. He says that they shouldn't even concern themselves with bringing their possessions back because everything in Egypt is going to be so good for them. And that's kind of like a symbol of the new creation too, right? When we die, we can't take our possessions with us. But when we get to the other side of eternity, there will be things there for us that are so much better than anything we had here on this earth. In verses 21 through 24, Joseph gives his brothers all these gifts and all these clothes and all this sustenance for their journey, telling them to go get their father and bring him back to Egypt. He gives them these big wagons so they can haul all of their stuff back. And even Benjamin gets an extra set of clothes, gets an extra portion. And he has another extra portion set aside for Jacob, his father. And Joseph also tells his brothers not to quarrel on their way back, reminding us of how much they've changed since we first met them. Remember how they quarreled with each other? Remember how their moms quarreled with each other? Remember how their fathers, their forefathers and ancestors all quarreled with each other? Through Joseph's actions, God is breaking these cycles of sin and of generational trauma. Then they went up from Egypt and came to the land of Canaan to their father Jacob. They told him, saying, "Joseph is still alive, and indeed he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." But he was stunned, for he did not believe them. I mean, imagine you're Jacob, right? Picture it. You're so bereaved of your children. You've sent them off to this land where maybe they'll die. You don't even know if they're going to come back. You're starving to death. And then all of a sudden, one day, after waiting and waiting and waiting, they come over the hill, swagged out in new clothes with new money and these big wagons. And they say, "That son that you thought was dead, he's alive." When they told him all the words of Joseph that he had spoken to them, and when he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to carry him, their spirit of their father Jacob revived. Then Israel said, "It is enough. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Jacob changes again and accepts the fact that his son is still alive. Before, he was a worrying, overprotective father, but now his spirit has been renewed. He's a new creation. He's a new man who's not going to doubt God again. And he even says that the reason his soul has been revived like this is because Joseph, the son he thought was dead, is really alive. You know, he doesn't care as much about all the food, all the money, all the clothes, all of that stuff. As long as his son is alive, Jacob is happy. Now, for some of us, especially those who are suffering right now, we can be skeptical at this whole story, just like Jacob was. We say, well, it's good that God had a plan for them and God worked it out for them, but he doesn't really have a plan for my suffering. He doesn't really care about what I'm going through. And I'm telling you, that's wrong. That's a lie from the devil. He has a plan for you, and your suffering, it has a purpose. Now, we may not learn about what that purpose is until we get to heaven. We might die never having that moment that Jacob had where he sees his sons come over the hill with all these clothes. But we can trust in the promise that God does have a plan and that God is in control. If we pursue him, he will not abandon us because we're his children who were dead and are now alive. And in this chapter, we finally get it. We see that confirmation that God was working the whole time. Through all the fights, the jealousy, the sin, the sex, the lust, the greed, God finally found someone who was able to bring a little bit of Eden back to earth. He was finally able to give a little bit of blessing, a little bit of deliverance to all the families of the earth. And Joseph accomplished that by seeking God's glory and God's wisdom above everything else. He lived a righteous life in spite of all the suffering he endured. And because of his obedience and because of his forgiveness, he's able to deliver his family into a period of abundance when there's famine everywhere else around. Now, of course, it doesn't last, right? We know that the rest of the Bible exists, but this is a picture of what's to come. This is a picture of what's at stake. Through Jesus, we can also have an eternally abundant life, even in the midst of all the famine around us. Through the blessing and forgiveness that Jesus gives us, we can experience a return to our Father. But until Jesus returns and God sets all creation right the way it was supposed to be in the beginning, we have the opportunity and the blessing to be like Joseph and like Jesus. We can seek God's glory, generously serve others, and live a righteous life by God's wisdom, even in spite of suffering. And it's only possible because of what Jesus has done for us, of which Joseph was just a picture. We've got 1 week of Genesis left, and I hope you'll tune in and watch those videos. But until then, thanks for watching 1189. Have a good day, and God bless.